When the God Valley incident was first brought up, Sengoku did not just say that God Valley's existence was wiped from all records, but that the island literally vanished without a trace. Yet this was very likely not the work of the world government. I believe that the one behind God Valley's disappearance was a character Imu fears even more than Joy Boy. But unlike Joy Boy, this character actually survived the events of the Void Century. The reason why God Valley vanished is that this character simply reclaimed what was his, as he was the country's original founder. But much more importantly, he is the reason the world government believes that they have been at war for the past 800 years. Throughout the entire One Piece story, the government has been fighting a legendary figure who lives down on the sea floor. I think that the one who caused God Valley to disappear was Davy D. Jones, who is still alive in the current story. Like most readers, when hearing about the island of God Valley disappearing, the thing that came to my mind was the one other time we've seen something like this happen in the story, which was the destruction of Lulusia Kingdom. These two events basically couldn't be more similar, where the story even has Saint Saturn repeat the exact same line of dialogue about these being places that never even existed. But I think these similarities are misdirection from the One Piece story. This is because we already know that it was impossible for the world government to have used the weapon that destroyed Lulusia to also destroy God Valley. Monkey D. Dragon, who we now know was personally at God Valley during the incident, says that he had no knowledge of the government using this kind of weapon before Lulusia. There is also a very good reason to believe Dragon's words here, as in another scene in the previous arc, it was also revealed that this government weapon can only work if it has the Matter Flame as an energy source. The God Valley incident happened 38 years ago, but at this point, Vegapunk was still decades away from recreating the Matter Flame, meaning that it would have been impossible for the government to use this weapon at the time of the God Valley incident. When Lulusia was destroyed, its after effects also caused a global cataclysm of massive earthquakes and the planet's water levels rising by an entire meter. The narrator says that there was no parallel for a disaster like this in recorded history, but while we know the government likes to manipulate events, it is extremely unlikely that they could have covered up something like this happening 38 years ago. After the Void Century, the world government has clear limits in the scale of events they can hide from the public, where, for example, the elders thought it was impossible to cover up something like 2 emperors being defeated at once. But also, much more importantly, we actually saw that they were unable to hide the global aftermath of Lulusia's destruction, where this was an event experienced by practically the entire planet. But if the government did not use this weapon on God Valley, by what other means could someone have made an entire island disappear from the map? Only very few characters in the story have ever shown such godly powers, but this may in fact also be our biggest clue. There could be a hidden character in the story who wields exactly these kinds of powers. A character who could have not only been the one who took out God Valley, but they could also be the one behind several of the unexplained cataclysms that we have seen throughout the story. What this current flashback has made very clear is that Imu is terrified of the existence of Davy D. Jones. While Imu views the entire D-Clan as his enemies, there is a night and day difference in how Imu treats the other D-Clan members compared to how he treats the descendants of Davy Jones. Imu is still perfectly willing to let other D-Clan members serve in the Warlords and the Marines, but with the Davy Clan, what Imu wants is complete extermination. Even though God Valley was full of some of the most dangerous pirates in history, Imu saw all of them as mere distractions, where his goal above anything else was the elimination of Davy D. Jones's descendants. The mere mention of this man's name actually causes Imu to panic, but what Sebek also hints at is that Imu may even fear Jones more than he does Joy Boy. Why would Imu be so afraid of this man? From what we've been shown, Imu is unquestionably the most powerful character we've ever seen in all of One Piece. He is the ruler of a global empire that covers most of the planet. The vast majority of the strongest characters in the series are under the world government's flag, but also, Imu himself wields powers we've never before seen in the story, where he is completely unaffected by even the strongest attacks, and is able to convert even the most legendary characters into his puppets. Yet despite all his power, Imu is still terrified of Jones. This all builds Davy Jones up as an absolutely godly character in his own right, someone far beyond even the likes of Rocksteady Sebek or Goldie Roger. But what powers could Jones possibly have to warrant such fear from a character as strong as Imu? I think the answer was given in the scene where Jones was first mentioned, back in the Long Ring Longland arc. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, definitely subscribe to my channel and be on the lookout these next 2 months, since I've got a whole lot of upcoming videos in the pipe. In chapter 306, Robin introduces Davy Jones as a legendary pirate who claims anything that sinks into the sea, be it ships or treasure. Jones's legend is seemingly known across the world, where both Robin and Sanji know his story, despite coming from different seas. According to legend, Davy Jones resides on the sea floor, but also, he is still alive. We now in the final saga know that Davy Jones was a real person in the story. So, as crazy as this may sound, what if the rest of his story was also true? Imu himself is living proof that characters who lived during the Void Century can still be alive today. Unlike with Joy Boy, the One Piece story has never actually said that Jones died, but there is also one scene in particular that hints at his survival. When Sebek and Imu talk on God Valley, Imu first mistakes Sebek for Jones, but Sebek himself says that the two have never even met. Imu did in another scene also call Luffy as Joy Boy, but what if this scene between Imu and Sebek meant something different? A possible interpretation of Sebek's line is that he is saying that he could have in fact met Jones, where Sebek knows that his ancestor still lives, but that he has never had the opportunity to meet him. This could also be the real reason why Imu mistakes Sebek for Jones, where Imu also knows that Jones lives, where he could resemble Sebek to a point, where Imu literally thought that Sebek was him. The idea of Davy Jones still being alive is however just one thing. The truly unbelievable part about his legend is Jones apparently living down on the sea floor. This sounds especially hard to believe, now that Sebek has seemingly confirmed that Jones was in fact a human, which by all logic should mean that he couldn't survive living underwater. I however think that the part about Davy Jones living on the sea floor is not only true, but a likely hint to his special powers. I think this may be a reveal that the One Piece story has been waiting literal decades to do. The reason why Imu is so afraid of Jones, but also the explanation of how Jones could have not only lived all this time on the sea floor, but also done something like make God Valley disappear, is that Jones could be the user of a water devil fruit. While some readers might think that a water devil fruit would be impossible, I think they should reconsider. This devil fruit is not only completely possible, but I'm personally convinced that One Piece has been deliberately saving it for the final saga. A popular misconception about devil fruit users is that they are weak to water, but this is not strictly speaking true. In truth, devil fruit users only become weakened when their bodies are submerged, and otherwise, unless it is the user's elemental weakness, water does nothing to a devil fruit user. Several devil fruit users in the story have in fact already shown that their powers allow them to literally manipulate water. These characters have been appearing in the story ever since the pre-time skip, but have only increased in number the longer the series has gone on. What makes the idea of a water Logia devil fruit even more likely, however, is that many of the known Logia devil fruits in the story, such as the snow fruit or the chill fruit, are essentially just subsets of a water Logia fruit. This is relevant because in One Piece, the story very consistently tries to escalate the level of its devil fruit powers. While Ace's fire devil fruit seemed incredibly powerful when first introduced, the story later upped the ante by revealing a superior version of it during Marineford with Akainu's fruit. This same thing has happened in a lot of other arcs, such as during Whole Cake Island, where Katakuri's fruit very much seemed like a superior version of Luffy's rubbery powers. Yet then this too was escalated in the next arc, where Luffy's fruit was actually revealed to be the fruit of a rubber god. The reveal about the Nika fruit also changed one other thing about One Piece, where what it proved was that these legendary powers from the Void Century were far beyond anything else we had seen in this story. This phenomenon has continued in the final saga, when we've now finally been introduced to Imu's abilities, which in many ways breaks several conventions of the One Piece story, but also, just like the Nika fruit, are on a whole other level compared to anything we've seen before. In the lore, Davy D. Jones is presented as a character every bit as legendary as Imu or Joy Boy. What this means is that his powers were very likely equally out of this world. Almost 1200 chapters into the story, I personally cannot really think of a more interesting devil fruit to match Nika and Imu's powers than a water logia fruit. But this fruit could honestly be the strongest thing we've ever seen in all of One Piece. A water logia could essentially allow its user to neutralize any devil fruit user in the story, where no matter how strong you are, the rule about characters who feed on devil fruits becoming weakened if they're submerged applies to literally everyone. What we also know is that devil fruits get exponentially more powerful depending on the environment. This was something brought up by Crocodile all the way back in Alabasta, where he believed that no one could beat him in the desert. If Davy Jones had an actual water devil fruit, this would essentially mean that virtually the entire planet would be his playground. Still, while this may be an interesting idea, is any of this actually possible? In the first scene where he was introduced, Davy Jones is heavily connected with water, where people across the world believe that he claims everything that gets sunken into the sea. Yet, is this enough evidence to speculate that he has the literal water devil fruit? But more importantly, there is still the big question of this entire video that I still have not yet fully answered. Why would Jones use this power to sink God Valley? I think this is where I can finally get into what I think is the most compelling part of this theory. This part being that during the Void Century, Davy D. Jones may have been known by a different name. There is a very peculiar thing said by the narrator in this Elbaf flashback, where apparently Roxy Sebek saw himself as a worshipper of Davy Jones. There is also another mystery this flashback never gave an answer for, which is why exactly is God Valley called God Valley. The Celestial Dragons say that the country's name was an affront to them, but while we know this place was a nation unaffiliated with the world government and the home of the Davy clan, we never actually learned the reason behind this country calling itself the Land of God. I think the answer to these questions was however dropped in the Harley text, where the text talks about a mythical being who seemingly lived during the Void Century. I think that in the past, the name Davy D. Jones also went by was the god of the sea. What a lot of longtime One Piece fans may know is that One Piece is a story that takes a lot of inspiration from mythology. This goes even beyond Japanese and Asian mythology, where the story is actually full of references to myths from the Western world, such as Norse mythology, and in particular, Greek mythology. What I think is that the myth One Piece used as the basis for God Valley was the ancient Greek story of Atlantis. In the story, Atlantis was said to be a wealthy island nation that existed long ago, where the people who inhabited the island were said to be descended from sea god Poseidon. With time, however, Atlantis became corrupted, and the gods decided that they needed to act, and that the entire island of Atlantis was to be drowned. In a quote I was able to find from a modern translation of this story, it is said that Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and vanished, which does not sound all that unfamiliar. I however think that Atlantis' parallel with God Valley goes a lot deeper than them both being islands that disappeared. I think the more important part of this story is Atlantis being a country whose people were descended from the sea god. Poseidon is a name that literally appears in One Piece, where ancient weapon Poseidon is the mermaid princess that is able to command the sea kings. Yet what I and a lot of other fans often forget is that this is not the real Poseidon. What Neptune says in chapter 650 is that the ancient weapons were not actually gods themselves, but that they were only named after gods that had already existed even before them. This would mean that in the past, there was a being the One Piece world knew as the original sea god Poseidon. There is only one other reference to this deity in the entire story outside Neptune's quote, which comes from the Harley text. Here, the sea god is mentioned once at the end of the second world, where it is said that man killed the sun and became god, and the sea god stormed. Like a lot of readers, I believe that the events of the second world describe what happened during the Void Century, as the part about the man killing the sun and becoming god is very likely a reference to Imu killing Joy Boy and becoming the world's new godly ruler. I had honestly never thought about the sea god part before, but with the information we've now gotten in this Elbaf flashback, this part finally makes sense to me. I think this part of the text is all in reference to Davy D. Jones. Multiple things mentioned in the Harley text have already turned out to be real things present in the story, where the sun god is in truth the awakened user of the Nika devil fruit, while something like the Hellfire Serpent is according to the giants actually the red line. What this means is that the sea god was also more than likely a real entity. I think the Harley text reference to an enraged sea god is about Imu taking the title of King of the World from Davy Jones. In Jones's original introduction, Robin says that he was cursed by a demon, which now that we've seen Imu's true powers, likely means that this demon was Imu. But there is also a very interesting line of dialogue said by Vegapunk during the Egghead arc, where according to him, the Great War that started during the Void Century apparently never ended. This is however not just Vegapunk's opinion, but the world government themselves confirm that they are in an ongoing ancient battle. Very interestingly, in the Harley text, the part about the enraged sea god is also described to have happened after Imu's supposed victory over Joy Boy. So, here is what I think this could all mean. During the Void Century, Davy D. Jones could have been a powerful user of the Water Logia Devil Fruit, which led to people all over the world seeing him as the sea god. Jones came from the kingdom of God Valley, which may have been named after him, where just like Sebek, his own people could have worshipped Jones as a deity. Just like Imu, Jones may well at some point have become immortal, but rather than stopping there, he may very well have elevated himself to the status of King of the World. Yet, before the end of the war, Imu stole Jones's throne from him. Rather than dying, however, Jones with the powers of his devil fruit could have gone into hiding on the sea floor, as this was a place where the world government could not reach him. After the Void Century, both Jones and his descendants may have never stopped opposing Imu, where the kingdom of God Valley never joined the world government, and Jones with his devil fruit could have been a lurking menace on the seas for over 800 years, where all this time he may have been gathering his power by claiming anything that sinks into the depths. One interesting thing about the One Piece story is that several immensely powerful storms have actually taken place during multiple points in the lore. When Shiki and Roger clashed during the Earth War, the battle was actually stopped by neither of them, but by a storm that was so strong that it both took out most of Shiki's armada, but also maimed Shiki himself for the rest of his life. For context, both Roger and Shiki are some of the strongest pirates in history, where the Ace novel even names them both as leaders of their era. Another incredibly strong storm in the story happened to Rayleigh during his retirement. Apparently, this storm was so strong that Rayleigh thinks he could have died without Hachan's help. This is despite Rayleigh himself being so strong that he even as an old man was able to swim for days in seeking infested waters. Still, what if the reason why some of these storms we've heard about in the story were so strong that they were able to overpower even some of the strongest characters was that they were the creation of an even stronger character? What the Harley text says about the sea god is that they began storming at the end of the era. As insane as this idea may be, one of the reasons why the seas of the One Piece world are so treacherous could be that this is actually the doing of Davy Jones using his devil fruit powers. I think it is now time I finally answer the big opening question of this entire video. Let's say that all of this is somehow true, where Davy D. Jones is still alive. He is the legendary sea god mentioned in the Harley text, the ancient user of a Water Logia devil fruit, but also that he is the one who made God Valley vanish. Why would Jones do something like this? Why would he suddenly, after hundreds of years, target the island of his own people? I think the answer could be one of the reasons the world government themselves came to God Valley. The Celestial Dragons did not just target God Valley to kill the Davy clan, or even just to stage their native hunting competition, but what they also wanted were the island's vast natural resources. If Davy Jones is the one who sank God Valley, it could be that what he was doing was simply the same thing he's possibly been doing for hundreds of years, claiming treasure. One of the oldest ideas brought up in One Piece was all the way back in Alabasta, which is that a country is its people. If we use this idea with God Valley, this would mean that the kingdom of God Valley had moved on after the incident, where there was nothing left but an empty island. However, the island's vast natural resources would have still remained. Rather than allowing these treasures to fall into the hands of the world government, Davy Jones may well have decided to reclaim his former kingdom by sinking God Valley down to the sea floor. As cool as I think this theory about Davy D. Jones being the one who caused God Valley to vanish is though, I do however have one caveat about the idea. If Davy Jones is revealed as the sea god and the user of the water devil fruit, this may somewhat go against the idea of what we've been told about Imu and the world government. it is very much looking like Imu's ultimate goal is to sink everything below the red line. This could however rather go against the idea of Imu's great enemy being the one who rules the seas. Further, Imu himself is also a character heavily connected to the sea, where even his name backwards is Umi, meaning sea in Japanese. However, I do not think these ideas are necessarily against one another. While sinking most of the world underwater might increase the potential power of the water Logia user, it also might not. According to his legend, Jones gets his power from stealing wealth that gets sunk into the sea. If the world government were to essentially eradicate almost all civilization outside the red line, however, they would essentially be starving Jones of this habit, where he would no longer have anyone to steal from. While it is also true that Imu himself is heavily connected to the sea, I would also argue that Imu's character is far more connected to land. This is ultimately the world Imu seems to desire, where the only place on the planet with any power or relevance would be the Red Line continent. I think this is also the reason why Imu decided to call his home Pangaea Castle, where he seemingly wants a world where people live on one piece of land, where Imu is the dictator. There is however one last mystery that I think this video needs to tackle, which is what at the end of the God Valley incident happened to Roger and Garp. Roger says that the final attack he and Garp did on Sebek would have taken all three of them out of commission, yet somehow Roger and Garp, without any ship, were still able to make it off God Valley alive, even though they should have been completely out of power, and even though the island was apparently just about to disappear. If there's one more idea that could make this video's theory even more nuts, it would probably be that Roger and Garp actually came face to face with Davy Jones, just as he was about to sink the island. And for some reason, Jones decided to spare the two. I think it's incredibly interesting that out of all the characters who participated in the God Valley incident, the story decided that the last three men on the island were all D-Clan members. Maybe I've actually been looking at this whole theory wrong. Maybe the true reason why Davy Jones came to God Valley was not for the island's resources, but just to get Garp's autograph. I think this is actually the most likely thing to have happened, where Jones is a big fan of Garp, because he has raised some of the government's greatest enemies, and that it was actually Garp who commanded Jones to wipe this filthy criminal island off the map. This is probably the theory this video should have been about, but I'm too lazy to rewrite it. If you want to see me break down how the story will ultimately go about revealing this final outcome of how God Valley disappeared, definitely click here to watch this video about why I think this is all set up to be revealed when Blackbeard has his talk with Garp in the final saga. Thanks a lot to all my members for the loot, but also to everyone who watched this video to the end. Thanks a lot. I'm trying to hunker down and put out way more content this winter. Anyway, take it easy.